Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Sources from the Coalition Provisional Authority said that Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz arrived to Baghdad in a surprise visit. Wolfowitz is visiting Iraq hours after 4 foreigners and 5 Iraqis were killed in a Ramadi when a car bomb went off in the city's center. As the date of transfer of authority approaches, security remains a top concern for Iraqis. They wake up to the sound of explosions and to various reports of death and destruction. Renewed clashes erupted in Baghdad between the Iraqi forces and armed men. Many people were wounded, but no one was killed.
3 or 4 people were wounded. The fight started here and they were injured by the market.
Fighting broke out between the two sides after armed assailants opened fire in the direction of an Iraqi police station. The Iraqi forces responded by opening fire as well. In a Ramadi, 5 Iraqis and 4 foreigners were killed. In addition, dozens of Iraqis were wounded during an attack with grenades. The 4 foreign passengers were on board of an American 4-wheel drive vehicle, widely used by coalition workers. They drove over an explosive device that was planted on the road, causing a strong explosion. Iraqi police report that 2 armed men fired their machine guns at Ghazi Talabani's vehicle while on his way to work. He was immediately killed and his driver was severely wounded. Talabani was a member of the Kurdistan Democratic Union, led by Jalal Talabani. Oil and gas pipelines were also sabotaged. An oil pipeline that connects Kirkuk with oil wells 40 kilometers north of the city was exploded. An arsons expert from the Northern Iraqi Petroleum Company confirmed that the blast was due to an explosive device placed under the pipeline, leading to the explosion and setting the pipeline on fire. United States and Iraqi officials had previously reported that an oil pipeline near the southern city of Al-Basra was also attacked by an explosive device, and oil leaked out.
A brief statement attributed to prominent Iraqi cleric Sayyid Muqtada Sadr asked members of his Mahdi army who are not residents of the holy city of Najaf to return to their regions. Al-Sadr's move came after he earlier announced his intention to establish a political party and to participate in Iraq's incoming elections. Iraq's interim president welcomed Al-Sadr's intention as a smart move.
Sayyid Muqtada, I think this is a very smart move of him. I kept saying consistently that if I were in his shoes, I would try to go into the political arena instead of raising arms. He has supporters, he has constituents. He should try to go through the political process, and I commend this smart move on his side.
The United States refused to set a date for handing over Saddam Hussein to an interim Iraqi government for trial. And Britain's Foreign Minister Jack Straw opposed the use of the death penalty against Saddam if he was found guilty. Now, this report has more.
The clock is ticking towards a June 30 deadline for the U.S. occupation handover of power to Iraqis, and it seems that Saddam Hussein's remaining time before his prosecution is running low. Iraq's interim President Ghazi Aliawar announced an official confirmation to interim Prime Minister Ayad Allawi's statement that the former Iraqi president and all of his detained henchmen will be handed to Iraqi authorities in less than 2 weeks and will stand trial as soon as possible. Aliawar stressed that Iraq must have adequate security guarantees in place before the interim government take custody of Saddam.
We must first make sure that we can maintain protection for his life until he goes into trial. We must make sure that the trial goes as a legal process. He has his own fair chance of defense, and the government has its own chance in expressing charges on him We have an excellent, credible judiciary system. We are different than him. He used to put sentences up front to the people. We don't do that. We are civilized people. This is the new democracy in Iraq. We must make sure that he gets a fair trial.
Al-Yawar was echoing U.S. President George W. Bush's condition of security for handing over the former president. Bush hinted that he would not commit to turn over Saddam by a June 30 deadline, as previously asserted by Allawi. U.S. occupation spokesman Dan Senor gave U.S. authorities right to hold Saddam far beyond the handover ceremony, saying the Americans could keep him until the cessation of hostilities, which he said aren't expected to stop on June 30.
Under international law, however, we cannot hand Saddam Hussein over to a non-sovereign government. The government will be fully sovereign June 30th. We also do not have to hand him over until there's a cessation of active hostilities. The repatriation doesn't begin until after that. Hostilities, unfortunately, continue. But our goal, our priority, is to get him into Iraqi hands as soon as possible.
Iraqi officials say Saddam's AIDS trials could have the tribunal prove a chain of command linking Saddam to crimes against humanity. The International Committee for the Red Cross has indicated that under international law, Saddam must be charged or released after the formal end of occupation, since he was detained as prisoner of war.
As international humanitarian law, we cannot deal with speculation on what will happen after the 30th of June, whether he's charged or not charged. His status is precisely the same as anybody. He can be charged, he has to be charged in order to be tried and then prosecuted.
Saddam is likely to be tried for the persecution of Muslim Shiites and Kurds in southern and northern Iraq back in the 1980s and 1990s, as well as for suits of war crimes during 1990 invasion of neighboring Kuwait. Iran is also believed to be preparing a formal complaint against him for the torture of Iranian prisoners captured during the 1980-1988 Iraq war against Iran.
Iranian President Mohammad Khatami warned Wednesday that Iran would have no moral obligation to maintain the suspension of uranium enrichment and allow tougher UN inspections if a harsh European drafted resolution is adopted by the International Atomic Energy Agency. This report has more. Iran continued to send strong warnings that if the International Atomic Energy Agency adopts under US pressure a hard stance this week in Vienna, then this will lead to serious repercussions. In the latest such statements, Iranian President Said Mohammad Khatami warned that Iran would have no moral obligation to maintain a suspension of uranium enrichment and allow tougher UN inspections if a harsh European drafted resolution is adopted by the IAEA board. Khatami said that for the moment his country does not want to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty or stop applying the additional protocol. He described the British, French, German draft as very bad, saying Iran will not accept a resolution that is illegal and contrary to its rights, especially because one of its paragraphs calls on Iran to reconsider its decisions to begin tests at a uranium conversion facility, a key step in the nuclear fuel cycle. And this uranium conversion is not forbidden by the NPT or any safeguards agreements. The draft resolution deplores that overall Iran's cooperation has not been as full, timely and proactive as it should have been, and calls for a probe into Iran's nuclear program to be toughened and wrapped up in months. The draft picked up on IAEA Chief Mohammad al-Baradei's hardening the tone of his agency's investigation into Iran's nuclear program, which the US claims is secretly developing atomic weapons. Washington pushes to send the Iranian dossier to the UN Security Council, which could impose sanctions on the country. For his part, Saeed Hossein Mousavian, head of the Foreign Policy Committee of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, said Iran had already complied with 3 major requests from the IAEA to provide information and to voluntarily suspend uranium enrichment activities. He said there were 2 remaining issues: contamination of some equipment by highly enriched uranium and Iranian research into advanced P2 centrifuges, which he expected to be clarified in the remaining month. Mousavian said it was time for the IAEA's board to close the Iranian dossier and let the Secretariat handle the rest of the investigation, insisting Iran has really cooperated beyond the NPT additional protocol. Iran asserts it is not interested in nuclear weapons, and Iranian Foreign Minister Kamal Kharazi bitterly accused Britain, France and Germany of bowing to US pressure. He added now was not the time to get tougher with Iran. The Iranian parliament has to debate the ratification of Iran's signature last year of the additional protocol to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Lebanon is carrying out intense diplomatic contact to win the release of 3 Lebanese held hostage in Iraq. George Fernando and Jamil Deeb were abducted Monday. Habib Khalil Samour had been held for the past month and was shown on a videotape released by armed groups calling itself the Battalion of Islamic Anger. Fernando and Deeb were believed to be working for a construction firm. Samour said he went to Iraq to carry out studies on the mentality and opinions of Iraqis under occupation, adding that he worked for a market research company which provided information to the Americans. The body of a 4th Lebanese man, Hossein Olayan, who worked for a telecom firm, was found in Baghdad Sunday. Israeli forces shot dead a Palestinian activist of the Islamic Jihad and detained several others in the West Bank city of Jenin after the U.S. State Department renewed long-standing American objections to Israel's reconstruction of a controversial West Bank wall that will incorporate a Jewish settlement deep inside occupied Palestinian territory. The U.S. and the so-called quartet, which includes the U.S., UN, EU and Russia, had welcomed a pullout from the Gaza Strip proposed by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. In the West Bank city of Nablus, Israeli troops detained 2 Palestinian girls. The father of the 2 schoolgirls were taken away with them. Israeli public radio reported that they had been planning to carry out an attack in Israel.
An organization calling itself Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula published a statement on their website threatening to kill the American hostage, Paul Marshall Johnson, who was kidnapped last Sunday, unless Saudi authorities free Al-Qaeda prisoners within 72 hours, which would be this Friday evening. The first reaction came from Riyadh, which announced that it will not negotiate with terrorists and will not release any of the detainees from its prisons.
If the infidels of the Saudi government want their American prisoner released, then they must release our Mujahideen prisoners.
هدد فرع تنظيم القاعدة في جزيرة العرب بإعدام الرهينة الأمريكي بول مارشال.
The Al-Qaeda branch that operates in Saudi Arabia threatened to execute the American hostage Paul Marshall Johnson, who was kidnapped last Sunday, unless Saudi authorities free Al-Qaeda prisoners held in Saudi prisons.
تم بثه على شبكة الإنترنت ومرفق به شريط فيديو.
The organization published a videotape and a statement on the internet demanding that the Saudi authorities release Al-Qaeda members within 72 hours, ending this Friday, or else it will kill the American hostage. The hostage, Paul Johnson, 49 years old, was seated and blindfolded with white material. He wore an orange shirt and has a tattoo on his shoulder. Johnson told his identity, nationality, and occupation on the video.
وقد أقر جونسون في الشريط بهويته وجنسيته ووظيفته.
I'm American out of the United States. In the front end of the Apache helicopter I work on Apache helicopters.
بعد ذلك ظهر في الشريط أحد الرجال.
Then a masked man identified himself by the name Abdulaziz al-Mukarram from the Al-Qaeda organization in the Arabian Peninsula and threatened to execute the hostage if his conditions are not met.
God has helped the Mujahideen of Al-Qaeda organization in the Arabian Peninsula to head the engineering team that oversees the development of the Apache helicopters used to incinerate Muslims in Palestine, Afghanistan, and Iraq. With God's help, the Al-Fallujah brigades managed to kill the director of the team and take one of its engineers hostage. His name is Paul Johnson.
وبرر بيان القاعدة خطف جونسون لأنه يعمل على تطوير.
Al-Qaeda's statement justified the kidnapping of Johnson on the basis that he works on developing the American Apache helicopter systems, which have been used to target Muslims in Palestine and Afghanistan. A similar statement was published on the same website last Saturday, in which Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for kidnapping the American engineer, who was the first Westerner to be kidnapped in the wake of the attacks. These attacks, launched by the extremists against against the foreigners started more than 1 year ago. The Saudi authorities have arrested hundreds of extremists and killed others during the campaign that it launched against Al-Qaeda, which claimed responsibility for the series of attacks.
U.S. President George Bush postponed handing over former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein to the Iraqi authorities until what he called an appropriate time, saying the handover will take place when all necessary security measures are taken to ensure that he stands trial. President Bush did not commit to handing over Saddam by June 30th, when authority will be transferred to the Iraqi government, as the Iraqi Prime Minister Iyad al-Alawi had said.
President Bush spoke in a joint press conference with the Afghani President Hamid Karzai. But in an indication that the American media is no longer interested in Afghanistan, most of the journalists' questions were focused on Iraq and the possibility of handing over the ousted Iraqi president to the Iraqi government before June 30th.
We're working with the
Although President Bush emphasized that the U.S. will hand over Saddam Hussein to the Iraqi interim government, he refused to give the date he would do so. He said that it is important to take necessary security measures, and he added that the U.S. and the Iraqi government want to make sure that security is not lax, to make sure that he is going to be tried. This comes after the Iraqi Prime Minister Iyad al-Alawi said that Saddam Hussein and other detainees will be handed over to the Iraqi authorities in 2 weeks, only so they can be tried as soon as possible. However, Bush refused to confirm that Saddam will be handed over within 2 weeks, and said that this matter is one of the important issues the U.S. is discussing with the interim Iraqi government. He also said that the U.S. wants to make sure that Saddam Hussein stays in jail when authority is transferred. The ousted Iraqi president has been detained by the American forces in an undisclosed location after he was captured last December. The International Red Cross said that Saddam Hussein is being considered a prisoner of war, and thus it is illegal for the American forces to keep him in prison because the transfer of authority ends the status of war. In another development, Randa al-Rahim, the Iraqi representative in Washington, criticized the coalition authority headed by Paul Bremer for failing to give sufficient authority to the Iraqis early on. In a congressional hearing, she said that the coalition authority was not ready to govern Iraq and did not have sufficient resources to do so. At the same time, it refused to give that mission to the Iraqis. She also pointed out that there is an ongoing defect in the government structure because the Iraqi interior minister does not have control over security decisions, and said that she hopes that this matter will be resolved after June 30th, when the authority will be transferred to the Iraqis.
Israeli troops shot and killed a Palestinian and arrested several others in the West Bank city of Jenin. Witnesses said an Israeli undercover unit entered Jenin early in the morning, cornered a number of activists and killed 25-year-old Islamic Jihad member Majid al-Saadi. Israeli military sources said forces on an arrest raid in the city shot and killed a wanted Palestinian when he tried to evade arrest. Medics said a 55-year-old taxi driver was seriously wounded in the raid. In Nablus, a church and a mosque were damaged when Israeli troops carried out controlled explosions nearby during a raid in the ancient Qasba quarter. Palestinian witnesses said shops, homes, a mosque and a Greek Orthodox church were severely damaged in the overnight operation. Military sources said the blasts were necessary to clear away battles that were blocking a narrow alley and which they feared might have been booby-trapped. Iran has threatened to resume uranium enrichment if the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, approves a draft resolution rebuking it for inadequate cooperation with UN inspectors. Britain, France and Germany have drafted a resolution that deplores Iran's poor cooperation with UN inspectors, and the IAEA Board of Governors are discussing it in Vienna this week. Several diplomats of IAEA board member countries said the majority of the board backed the draft resolution, and it is unlikely that the text will be changed very much. Iran's President Mohammad Khatami, in his toughest warning yet to the UN nuclear watchdog, told reporters after a cabinet meeting that if this resolution passes, Tehran will have no moral commitment to suspend uranium enrichment. But Khatami, aware that Washington wants Iran referred to the UN Security Council for possible sanctions, balanced his tough line with assurances that Iran's nuclear aims are peaceful and that Tehran has no intention of kicking out UN inspectors. Khatami also ruled out, following the calls of some hardliners in the Islamic Republic for Iran to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations in Vienna, Kenneth Brill, said Iran was trying to bully the board of the UN nuclear watchdog.
What we're seeing is a full court press of intimidation by the government of Iran and its delegation here to try to take a resolution that, while not perfect, is clearly based on the DG's statement of Monday and clearly based on the report, and to try to get the board to abdicate its responsibility. This full-blown effort at trying to change the action of the board through public and private intimidation, I think again suggests Iran has something to hide. People who are trying to produce electricity for light bulbs don't engage in this kind of behavior. And so I think it raises a lot more questions than the Iranians are trying to answer.
The U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld tried to vindicate himself from reports which confirm that senior American officials allowed the use of torture in detention centers and Iraqi prisons. At the same time, more truths are being revealed about the practices of the occupation forces against Iraqi prisoners.
That word is used by some people in a way that is fair from their standpoint, but it doesn't fit a dictionary definition of the word that one would normally accept.
Perhaps U.S. Defense Secretary's dictionary is special and very lax. What the world may reject because of its ugliness, for the Pentagon it is acceptable as long as the ones being tortured are not Americans.
All forms of torture are banned in the United States.
Rumsfeld's statements came after two secret memorandums were revealed last week in which administration lawyers said that American and international laws banning torture while interrogating prisoners do not apply to U.S. President George Bush because he is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Day after day, new truths are being revealed about how Iraqi prisoners were treated in Abu Ghraib prison. The American newspaper, The Washington Post, exposed a new memorandum confirming that General Ricardo Sanchez gave authority to officials in charge of prisoners to use the tactics that they saw fit without consulting with their supervisors. Meanwhile, General Janis Karpinski revealed information that General Jeffrey Miller, who was in charge of all coalition forces prisons in Iraq, told them to treat prisoners like dogs. Karpinski, who was in Iraq in 2003 and in charge of 16 U.S. Army prisons, including Abu Ghraib, said he told them it was necessary to treat the prisoners like dogs, and that if, for 1 second, the prisoners believed they were more than dogs, the army would not be able to control them.
The European countries which signed a declaration in Tehran in October to help Iran acquire peaceful atomic technology have openly reneged on their commitments, saying they will not make changes to the draft resolution they have proposed to the UN nuclear watchdog. Day 3 of a biannual meeting of the IAEA Board of Governors saw intense consultations in either camp in Vienna on Wednesday. Experts now say members of the Board of Governors will take up Iran's case on Thursday, But non-aligned movement countries which have a seat on the board say the case should be put off indefinitely unless their stance is taken into account in any revised resolution. Here is a report Jan Said Tawfiqi has filed on the reaction of Iranians to the ballyhoo the West has kicked up over Iran's nuclear program.
Discussions are still ongoing at the IAEA over Iran's nuclear case. For most papers in Iran and around the world, the IAEA gathering in Vienna is headline news.
While IAEA Board of Governors is discussing Iran's case in Vienna, public opinion here is focused on the final report by the agency. But people here have a very simple sentence to say: Iran has the right to use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes.
Application of nuclear technology by Iran is limited to civilian purposes, and not as the U.S. alleges to bomb making. We stop using the technology. No one can picture a bright future for the country. West, led by the United States, tries to politicize the case, but it is obvious Iran has no intention to make nuclear arms. Like many countries around the world, we have the right to use nuclear technology for civilian purposes. Otherwise, there will be no chance of technological progress. In less than a year, IAEA Chief Mohammed al-Baradei made 4 visits to Tehran to hold talks with Iranian officials. In Vienna, he expressed hope Iran's nuclear case at his agency would soon be declared closed. He said Tehran has maintained relatively good relations with the UN nuclear watchdog. Britain, Germany, and France have presented to the IAEA a draft resolution which acknowledges that Tehran has granted inspectors access to its nuclear sites, while saying Iran should offer more cooperation with the UN nuclear agency. In a letter to leaders of the 3 European countries, President Khatami said such behavior will deal a blow to the ongoing cooperation within Tehran and the international community over peaceful application of nuclear technology.
President Mohammad Khatami warned on Wednesday Iran would never accept any IAEA resolution which ignores the nation's right to access peaceful atomic technology. Talking to reporters after a cabinet session, the chief executive made it clear that Iran does not intend to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. However, it expects the IAEA not to demand the Islamic Republic something which is not in accordance with international regulations on nuclear technology. The Iranian president reminded the European trio of the commitments made in Tehran declaration and hoped that the Europeans maintain an independent view despite growing U.S. pressures. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Kamal Kharrazi said Iran's decision on its nuclear issue depends on the outcome of the IAEA Board of Governors meeting. The top diplomat told reporters at the end of the cabinet session on Wednesday that if the Europeans do not live up to their commitments then there is no reason for Iran to do the same unilaterally. Mr. Kharrazi added the draft resolution proposed by the European states to the IAEA is largely affected by U.S. pressure. He went on to say UN atomic watchdog inspectors have visited all nuclear facilities they wish to, and that many issues in Iran's nuclear case are proved clean to the agency. Elsewhere, the Iranian top diplomat termed as totally unacceptable claims by the United Arab Emirates over the 3 Iranian Persian Gulf islands, saying they are an integral part of no other country but the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.